Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of the Cold War, and somewhere in a nondescript building, a U.S. Army officer is sitting in a dim room with a pencil and a blank pad of paper. He's not writing a report. He's not decoding a message. He's trying to see a place he's never been, on the other side of the planet, using nothing but his mind. And the wildest part? The government is paying him to do this, not as a joke, not as a one-off experiment, for over 20 years. This is the story of the Stargate project, and by the end of this, you're going to have a hard time deciding what's crazier, the idea that it might have worked, or the fact that it went on for so long that it basically became a government job. So let's go back to the beginning. It's the 1970s, and the CIA has a problem. Rumors are swirling that the Soviet Union is pouring resources into psychic research, trying to weaponize ESP, remote viewing, telepathy, all of it. And here's the thing about the Cold War. It didn't really matter if psychic powers were real. What mattered was whether the other guy believed they were real and was working on them. Because if the Soviets developed a working psychic spy program and the US didn't even bother to check, that's an intelligence gap you can't afford. So almost out of paranoia as much as curiosity, the US government decides, fine, let's find out. They start funding research at the Stanford Research Institute, a respected think tank, and they bring in physicists, actual credentialed scientists, to design experiments around something they call remote viewing. The idea is simple to describe and insane to actually try. Can a person sitting in a sealed room describe a location or an object hundreds or thousands of miles away with no normal way of knowing what it looks like? And here's where the story stops being easy to laugh off. One of the first and most famous test subjects was a man named Pat Price, a retired police commissioner. Researchers would have someone drive to a random location, a park, a swimming pool, a research facility. And Price, sitting in a locked room miles away, would try to sketch and describe what was there. And according to the official reports, he got specific. Not vague, dreamy, I sense water and openness kind of specific, but details like fences, pipes, building layouts, even in one famous case, providing information about a secret Soviet facility that reportedly lined up with intelligence from other sources. That last part is the reason this program didn't get shut down after week 1. Because if this was all cold reading and lucky guessing, someone forgot to tell the government because they kept funding it. For 2 decades. Under different names, Scan 8, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, like a band changing its name to dodge a bad reputation. But it was the same core idea, chugging along through multiple presidential administrations. And it wasn't just one guy in a room. The program eventually trained a small roster of military remote viewers, and they were reportedly tasked with real intelligence questions. Where is a kidnapped hostage being held? What does this hidden weapons facility look like? Is there something buried at this location? These weren't parlor tricks. These were, allegedly, actual operational requests, treated with the same seriousness as satellite imagery or wiretaps, at least by some people inside the building. Now here's where you're probably leaning in, waiting for the but. And there is one. Because for as many spooky hits as the program produced, there were just as many misses, vague sketches, wrong answers, and results that only looked impressive after the fact, once someone went back and reinterpreted a squiggly drawing to match what actually happened. This is a pattern you'll notice with basically all paranormal research. The successes get retold at dinner parties, and the failures quietly vanish into a filing cabinet. So eventually, in the 1990s, the CIA brought in outside scientists to do a formal review of 2 decades of data, And their conclusion wasn't, "This is definitely real," and it wasn't, "This is complete nonsense" either. It was something a lot more boring and a lot more honest. The statistical results were slightly better than chance, in some contexts, under some conditions, but nowhere near reliable enough to be useful for actual intelligence work. In other words, interesting enough to keep scientists arguing, useless enough to stop paying for it. And that's basically the ending. In 1995, the program was declassified and shut down, officially anyway. $20 million and 20-plus years later, the U.S. government's final answer on psychic spying was a shrug. Not, "We proved psychics are real." Not, "We proved it's all fake." Just, "inconclusive." Which, if you think about it, might be the most unsettling ending of all. Because inconclusive means nobody can say for certain that it didn't work. And so, here's the thing to sit with. The people running Stargate weren't gullible late-night infomercial types. They were CIA officers, Army intelligence officers, physicists with real credentials, operating in a culture that specifically rewards being right and punishes wasting resources. And they still couldn't fully close the door on this. Not because they wanted to believe, but because, apparently, some of the results were just weird enough that closing the door felt premature. So next time you flip past a psychic hotline commercial and roll your eyes, remember, somewhere in a government archive, there's a folder of sketches drawn by a man in a locked room, describing buildings he never saw, funded by people who really, really did not want to believe him, and couldn't quite prove he was wrong.